From the Free Press, this is Honestly, and I'm Barry Weiss. Trump's inauguration is right around the corner, and there is so much to cover in this new White House. In the coming weeks, we're going to have key figures from the new Trump administration on to talk about what they're planning and what you can expect. But we all know that if Trump 2.0 is anything like Trump 1.0, there's going to be a lot to cover, a lot of twists, a lot of turns, and certainly controversy. And we wanted to make the space to analyze and break down each development as it unfolds. Starting today and for the next few months, we're going to bring you weekly panels to break down the politics with some of our favorite guests so you can stay informed about what's happening in Trump's new White House. For today, those two people are Batya Ungar-Sargon and Brianna Wu. Batya Ungar-Sargon is a Free Press contributor and the opinion editor at Newsweek. She is also the author of the essential book, Second Class. Brianna Wu is a Democratic fundraiser and activist, and in her past life, a video game developer. If you've heard them on Honestly together before, you know that these two come from different sides of the political spectrum. I don't even know if there's a spectrum anymore, just different places on the political map. But I value both of their perspectives, even or especially when they disagree, and I know you will too. Today, we talk about the LA fires that have that city burning and their political implications, not just for Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom, but for the Democratic Party. We talk about the civil war inside the MAGA movement between nationalist populists like Steve Bannon and free marketeers like Elon Musk. We talk about Mark Zuckerberg's red pill moment and the changes he's making at Meta. And then we end on some predictions for the confirmation hearings that begin this week in Washington. Batya and Brianna, welcome to Honestly.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. This is such an honor. I'm so excited to get to know Batya better and you too, Barry. This is going to be great.
Okay, brunettes, let's dive in. Before we get to the incoming administration, we need to cover a story that I really didn't expect us to be covering, although maybe, the people that pay close attention to nature and rain and incompetency in California governance would not be so surprised. And of course, I'm talking here about the California fires, since that is the thing on mine and I'm sure yours and everyone's mind. These are the most destructive fires in Los Angeles's history. As we record, 24 people have died. That number is sure to go up. More than 12,000 homes, businesses, and buildings have been damaged or destroyed. There are whole parts of Los Angeles that seem like a nuclear bomb has been set off. And lots of people are pointing lots of fingers. And I wanted to start by just asking, who's to blame here? And Batya, I thought maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, you're seeing, people on the left kind of blaming the climate change issue and people on the right blaming, DEI or incompetence. I feel pretty grossed out by both of these trends. I think Leighton Woodhouse really nailed it in a piece he wrote for Newsweek and also in the Free Press, where he argued that there's just something about the geology of this place that lends itself to these horrific acts of God every half a century, that the land there, around the Santa Monica Beach, Pacific Palisades should never have been developed because it was always going to erupt in flames in this way due to, the fact that the vegetation grows really lush during the rainy winter months and then dries out and the Santa Ana winds show up in the dry summer months. And so to me, I found that really compelling. I just think it is so hard to imagine somebody doing a better job with so much destruction. I don't have any confidence in Karen Bass or in Gavin Newsom. I don't think that they're stars or particularly competent people. But at the same time, nobody's pointing to things that are legitimate as, actual mistakes that would have actually prevented this or helped the situation. From what I've been able to gather, and, your listeners should tell me if I'm wrong about this, but it seems like the reason there was no water in the hydrants was not because there is an absence of water for this kind of thing, but because the water pressure was simply failed because they were trying to get all of the water in the city into one place, which is something that is very predictable, but I don't know how you fix for it. So to me, I feel like the politicization of this has been extremely disappointing. But I do think that on the ground, there's been a lot of unity and a lot of coming together, a lot of really moving moments on social media. So I'm trying to focus on those.
I'll say here that the piece that you referenced by Leighton Woodhouse has elicited more anger from very thoughtful people than perhaps any story we've run in the past few months. I want to just read part of a letter that we're going to run tomorrow because I think it'll take us a little deeper into this conversation. Leighton Woodhouse's piece is a revolting example of the defeatism that permeates far too much of civil society today. It's the same philosophy animating low birth rates, climate inevitability, and racial determinism. Taken to its logical conclusion, Woodhouse's argument is that because Earth is part of a solar system that faces black holes, asteroids, and an eventual implosion on the sun, we should merely hang our heads and mutter goodbye to our lineage as the natural process of destruction takes place. In other words, there's a kind of determinism and defeatism in the argument that, well, Los Angeles is built to burn. In other words, you could say the same thing. Manhattan is built to flood. We're surrounded by water. The entire idea of building cities and civilization is the idea that we push back against nature. So maybe I'm getting too heady for before noon on a Monday, but I got to say, having lived in LA over the past 4 years, having seen the way that the basic compact between citizens and the government does not work. You cannot, if you call the LAPD because there you see a robbery, or in my case, see a man wildly swinging a machete, it might take them an hour to show up. You know, living in New York feels like this utopian paradise in terms of just functionality compared to Los Angeles. So those fires are taking place in that political context, one in which things that should be public are increasingly privatized, and in which people have really lost faith in the mayor and in the governor. But I've gone on too long. I'm meant to be the host. Brianna, what do you think? Who's to blame?
I think it's so interesting because I think, Batya, you're being a little bit more generous on the Democrats than I would be. And this is what I would say. When I ran for Congress here in Massachusetts, I got a front row seat to what happens with one-party governance. And I think it really opened my eyes for a lot of things, because Massachusetts, I think this is a great place to live. But when it comes to some of our congenital problems that we just don't seem able to solve, like housing or public transportation, the problem is the political system, because Democrats are the only ones that win functionally. It's all set up to reward fealty to power. And I think LA is this problem on steroids, as well as as best as I can tell. I actually flew out of LA the day that the fire started. I was out there, and before it, I had a tweet that went viral, just talking about how difficult it was to see the city degrade over the last 15 years I've been visiting there. Like, homelessness is through the roof. I saw people shooting up drugs on the street. Like, it was really, really surprising to me. So, I think you're dead on that. I agree with the free press piece when you're saying the core problem is ecological, but that piece also tells stories about people not getting alerts on their phone when, we get an alert every time a senior citizen goes missing. So no matter what, I think there is a crisis of confidence in our elected leaders, and the trust has been broken that they're on our side. And I think that goes for Democrats particularly.
Let's talk about the political implications of this, not politicizing the fires themselves, but the implications. Trump tweeted, "One of the best and most beautiful parts of the United States of America," and I can attest to that, it's really paradise, "is burning down to the ground. It's ashes, and Gavin Newsom should resign. This is all his fault." 2 weeks from now, Karen Bass, will she be in or out? Gavin Newsom? What's his fate? He's long wanted to run for the presidency. Are those dreams over because of this fire?
That was my first thought. This is the end of his political career. I don't see how he survives this. And that sounds like a contradiction with what I opened with, but I don't think it is. It could be that something is just so devastating that your inability to respond to it in a way that's compelling ends your political career, even though there would have been very little you could have done. And obviously, like, if Governor, DeSantis had been in charge of LA, I think people would have felt like there was more competence going on around them, because I agree, of course, with both of you that the contract in California has been broken and that there's a huge crisis in trust in public institutions. I just think that this was an act of God and was so devastating for these ecological reasons that it seems sort of almost unfair. The Karen Bass being in Ghana, that was an unforced error that led to this perception that the people in charge were not worthy of the trust of the public. And they have earned that in a million different ways. I just don't think that I certainly, through all of my research, have not been able to come up with a better plan for how they could have handled this. But it may sink their careers. I think that that's very likely.
Here's one of the lessons, I'll put my cards on the table, that I draw from this. Government in LA and in many blue cities across the country has lost sight of the most basic parts of their job, which is keeping people safe from crime, safe from, majorly drug addicted people harassing them on the street, safe in this case from natural disasters like wildfires, or if not safe, at least prepared. And instead, they have focused on, what Rob Henderson might call luxury issues or niche boutique issues that have very little to do with the basics of governing. Is that going to be one of the kind of political takeaways from this?
I want to say something really quickly because I really want to hear what Brianna has to say about that. 20 people have died, I believe. Is that correct? That's the number.
24 so far, but it's definitely going to go up.
24 people so far have died, and we mourn every single one of them. Horrific tragedy. Most of them were seniors and disabled people who couldn't get out. It's horrifying. When you look at the scope of the damage, people were informed. People got out. I mean, if you had asked me, looking at that landscape, that apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, burnt out landscape, how many people I would have thought would have died. And again, God forbid, I'm not minimizing these horrific deaths. I would have expected it to be in the hundreds, if not the thousands. So I do think that there's a point of view and we're talking about, you think about the neighborhoods like the Pacific Palisades. I've been reading a lot about this. A lot of these towns are built. There's one road going into an area where 2,500 people live. The cars, they had to flee their cars and survived fleeing their cars because the trees on either side of the road were engulfed in flames. So really miraculous survival of many, many people. And again, God forbid not to undermine the deaths, but it does seem like people's lives were very much saved. There was a lot of property damage, and of course that's terrible, but I just wanted to make that point.
So where does your calculation come in that Gavin Newsom is going to have long-term damage from this? Because I think if we've seen anything over political history, I think all of us have learned that the American people tend to have short memories, right? So how do you get from A to B? How do you think this is going to, and look, cards on the table. I'm friends with multiple people that I'm sure are going to run for president, in 2028. We've had a lot of conversations about Gavin Newsom and the risk, what his vulnerabilities are. And I do think that there's an opening here. But I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you get from A to B where in 2028, after 4 years of Trump, he's not going to be competitive when he's one of the very best communicators that we have?
Because I think a lot of the donor base that would have supported him are now homeless. You can either sort of, really upset the middle class of the Democratic Party, or you can upset the sort of rich donor class. And I think a lot of the people who would have been that support against the bulwark of the sort of middle class and working class neighborhoods that went up in flame are now homeless and uninsured for their $20-30 million homes. And I don't think that they are going to forgive him for this, even if it's not necessarily his fault, especially when you're going to have such a crowded field of so many people who are not associated with being on TV at the time that their homes were burning.
I could also make the argument, though, from the, sure, there's the wealthy donor class perspective on it, but there's also, Altadena, this is not Malibu. This is not the Palisades. These are solidly middle class people. And if I'm them, and if my home is just burned to the ground, oh, and by the way, I'm thinking about this guy who went to the French Laundry or whatever it was in the middle of COVID. Someone can fact check me on that, but I think memory serves.
Nope, that was right.
Yeah. Why am I voting for the person, that is so out of touch with my everyday concerns? Just as an example, though, of I've sort of there's been a lot that we've published and a lot of commentary, I think, over the past since the election in November on the vibe shift, right? Yeah. Culturally and politically, and the woke is fading, people are moving to the right. You guys know this conversation. One piece of evidence just of how quickly things can shift is Maria Shriver, hardly a Republican conservative, is on Twitter talking about how Los Angeles and California needs radical change in the wake of this. I have friends in LA, progressives, texting me, I guess I'm a Republican now. In other words, they are so fed up. It's not that they're Republican on any particular policy issue. It's that they are so disgusted, Brianna, with, one party rule and the corruption of it, that they're just like, done. I'll vote for anything else that's not this. Do you see that happening?
I think that really brings me into, and I hope as we do this, like this is a point I really want to hammer. So I don't know, like we all remember Y2K. Y2K was a problem with technical debt. We made some decisions in the 80s and 90s, and we had to pay for it when the millennium came because our computers were going to crash. There's a term for this, it's called technical debt. The Democratic Party has serious silliness debt built up. And the silliness debt is focusing, even for me as a trans woman, on trans policy and pronouns and a whole bunch of, like there was a clip that went viral with someone like, doing sign language in front of a press conference from this, even though, teleprompters are built in. We focus so much on these superficial, silly issues that do not make working class people's lives better. And this is what, Batya, you've focused on like a laser, and your analysis is dead right about that. So Barry, this is my analysis. When Trump won, I was really heartened because the conversations I was having with Democratic insiders were very much, how do we get back in touch with working class people? How do we put some of these silly issues aside? How do we get back to basics again? And what is really terrifying me is today, as we're recording this, I'm already seeing it just get back to the same playbook, which is anti-Trump, deny everything, just point out that he's bad. This is a losing playbook for us. So I think.
But how can this be yoked to? How can this possibly? I'm sure there's a way. How can this possibly be yoked to Trump?
No, you can't. It's impossible. But what I'm saying is, like, look at what happened with Gavin Newsom, right? He had a tete-a-tete on Twitter with Trump. It was the silliness on that. You don't even believe in climate change. Does this help anyone get their house back? What people are going to find in LA as they are trying to rebuild is running into the residential zoning permit issue. This is going to make people so mad at their local government. And it's like either the Democratic Party can wake up and understand that people like us less than they like Trump, which is honestly scary, and we can change and we can get back to basics. And I think California is a real opportunity to do that. So my assessment is, if we wake up, if we handle this crisis well, this can be a moment that it's a new Democratic Party working together, or we can go back to the same old way of doing business, which is fealty to power and politicians thinking about their next election. And unfortunately, I think the latter is more likely.
One last question on this, and then I want to move on to another topic that's been engulfing the conversation in a different way. I've been thinking a lot about the fact that the paradox, and it goes like this. We live in a world in which private companies and very determined individuals are able to create rocket ships that return to Earth and are caught by giant chopsticks. Okay? There's people talking legitimately, and I didn't used to believe this, about colonizing Mars. Like, that seems within the realm of possibility in our lifetime. But at the same moment that kind of technological progress is possible, one of the greatest states in the Union, a state that is the fifth largest economy in the world, is not able to contain a fire. Like, this is not a political question, I guess, so much as a cultural one, but what does that mean? Is that a failure of priorities, or is it that everyone that's smart and competent runs as far away as possible from government? And if so, how do we change that? I've just been thinking about that a lot. It's like we live in an era of Starlink and SpaceX and choose your other thing. And also we live in an era in which I saw this unbelievably emblematic photo in which a person in LA was trying to put out a fire in his backyard with cartons of oat milk because there was presumably no water in the hose. That's unbelievable. What explains that?
I mean, how much have both of you worked with like elected officials up close? Like, I want to be really honest. Like, I cannot think of how many projects over the years, like, as someone who comes from the tech industry, like, I have a background in being able to do like regression analysis on large data sets, right? Which is a helpful thing to do. And I can't tell you how many times I have worked with people that I really loved and respected, but you see them up close and you try to get real life stuff done. And it's just a soul crushing experience constantly. Like, maybe my experience is just bad. Maybe I've just tried to work with the wrong people, but it feels like, I see stories about America like planning to go to the moon, and yeah, there was politics, but at the end of the day, you had people that were empowered to make decisions to get us there, right? The people in NASA were working together. It just feels, from my experience, like it's so hard for people with good intentions to go into government or partner with the government to get things done today. It feels like it's instantly about optics and elections and positioning yourself. I wonder if with social media and in this age where we're so focused on how we look, like this bread and butter problem solving ability is just something that is vanishing from the American governmental sector.
So, is Doge the solution?
I don't think so.
Okay, I think it might be. Before we
you?
get to Doge, let's talk about a little thing called H1B. Okay, and if you're not a person that lives on the internet, you might not even know what that is, so let me explain. The thing that everyone has been talking about for the last week or two is immigration, particularly the H-1B controversy. And for those who have never heard of what that is, H-1B visas go to highly skilled workers. Think doctors, lawyers, engineers, coders. It's sold as a program of visas, temporary visas for the best and brightest, and it's been around since about 1990. Now, typically the immigration debate in this country centers around low-wage workers and illegal immigration. But this controversy over H-1Bs has turned out to be one of the early and profound fissures between the two wings of the new Trumpist Republican Party. The sort of, forgive me for being crude, the free market business types, think of Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, and the true nationalist populists, think people like Steve Bannon. The Musk types have come out in ferocious defense of the H-1B visa program. Perhaps not surprising, given that of the 85,000 H-1B visas that are granted each year, about 70% of them work in tech. And then on the other side, we have a very strange coalition, maybe not so strange to Batya, people like Steve Bannon, but also Bernie Sanders. So, Batya, you were big on this issue. I saw you all over TV talking about it. Explain to us where you stand and why you stand there.
When I was reporting my book, Second Class, and traveling around the country interviewing working class people, their top two policy agenda items were they wanted much less immigration, legal and illegal, and much more access to high quality, affordable health care. And I'm going to say it again, I've said it before, the first party to arrive at that combination of much fewer immigrants, much more affordable healthcare is going to have a ruling majority for 40 years. They don't distinguish between legal and illegal immigration, because what people living on a shoestring budget understand is that labor is like everything else. It adheres to the ironclad law of supply and demand. The more you have of it, the cheaper it is. The less you have of it, the dearer it is. Now, as a leftist, it was my understanding that what we were trying to do was get higher wages for the working class. It turns out the Democratic Party didn't agree with me. They thought that the point was raise taxes on the rich, take all that money, and treat the working class like the poor and give them stuff. And honestly, working class people, that does not appeal to them. But they see competition in working class jobs that don't require a degree coming across the border in the form of 11 million illegal immigrants who are all going to be working in 5 or 6 or 7 industries, resulting in just collapsing wages in those industries. By the way, people will say those are jobs Americans don't want. It's absolute nonsense. There is not a single industry in America that is done a majority by immigrants, legal or illegal, meaning that a majority of every single job is done by native-born Americans. Now, just let's for a minute imagine how that makes them feel to be told by billionaires, this job is beneath the dignity of an American, so I'm going to bring somebody in from Venezuela to do it. So, but let's set that aside. What launched the whole debate was over the Christmas holiday. I don't understand why these people weren't with their families, but they weren't. They were on Twitter. Vivek Ramaswamy wrote a long Twitter thread about how American culture is producing lazy and stupid and mediocre people because Americans are culturally addicted to mediocrity. And Elon Musk joined in, retweeted somebody calling American workers retards, and then literally told people to go F themselves in the face because he's going to die on the hill of expanding the H-1B program. And the reason people like me have a problem with that program is, you know, back in the early 2000s when they shipped 5 million good middle-class jobs overseas to China and Mexico to build up their middle class, they told people to learn how to code. But now it turns out actually they're going to be importing people to do those coding jobs. So yes, 85,000 H-1B visas a year. There's about 500,000, 750,000 people who are on H-1B visas. 75% of tech engineers working in Silicon Valley today are foreign born. These are great middle-class jobs when they're done by Americans, but when you import people to do them from India, they do them for about $40,000 a year cheaper. And what that means is it drives down the wages across that industry. So our best and brightest are not now even going into that industry at all. So people will say, oh, you know, we're bringing in the best and the brightest. This is a brain drain from the rest of the world. It's nonsense. I mean, 500,000 people is not the best and the brightest. 30% of people working in STEM are foreign born. So again, we're talking about we're importing a caste of indentured servants who are allowed to enter the country, but they have to stay with that employer, which again reduces their wages by another 25%. This is the opposite of everything Trump campaigned on, ran on, and won on. And it's a huge betrayal of his base. And I'm really hoping that at some point, you know, Steve Bannon wins this fight and Elon is kicked to the curb before Trump becomes president. Because if he really is about to now betray his entire base over this immigration issue, which is the number one issue as far as they're concerned, you know, it's not going to go very well for the administration.
Okay, I want to get deeper into the politics. Brianna, before we move on, you're someone who actually has worked deeply in the tech industry, presumably with a lot of people on H-1B visas. Yeah. Are they indentured servants, as Batya said? What's the dynamic as you've seen?
I mean, you can certainly be at a company and be here on a visa and have a very difficult time leaving. That's 100% true. You know, and I find that I'm like halfway in agreement with you and I'm halfway not. So I'm with you because I've seen companies abuse this system to not pay software engineers what we're worth. I've seen that over and over and over again. But I live here in Boston. We have two sectors in Boston. It's tech and biotech. My husband works in biotech. I work in tech. And I can tell you, they bring in experts with this system that have experts in like molecular biology or subspecialties. And we just do need a system to bring them here. Like if you look at the coronavirus vaccine, this is an excellent example of this. Or if you look at the tech sector, you know, we are not training enough people with really deep understanding of AI, ML, DL, you know, these different ideas. We really do need to be able to bring in the very best people in the entire world to do this. So if you want like medium, I agree with you, the system has been broken. But I think if you're talking about shutting it down or like shrinking it entirely, I think that what you're going to end up doing is seeing the economy shrink, because when those people can't work in America, that is going to create a vacuum in all these other countries that are trying to create their own Silicon Valley. That talent is going to go there and we're going to be competing against them. So I think there is a way to split the difference here and address that very legitimate case that you made. And I think what that looks like is the higher the pay, the first you go into the visa system. Like it's a lottery system, and the more they're getting paid, the more it is there. And that really would make it so these very rare talents that we cannot get in the United States, or we need more expertise on, like drone technology, we can bring them in here. But if you're talking about completely shutting it down, I understand your argument. I think you do not understand how much it would cripple the tech sector in the United States and biotech.
We actually have a visa for people who are uniquely talented. We have the 01 visa for exceptional aliens. So we actually have a separate visa for people who are bringing a talent that you cannot get here. What makes me so enraged is that these H-1Bs are more often than not given to people who are totally mediocre. They come from less good schools than Americans in the tech sector. They get not as good grades. In fact, American STEM graduates routinely rank higher than people from China, Russia, and India. So they are mediocre compared to our homegrown talent. Plus, why are we not going into the inner city in Appalachia and teaching our people how to do those jobs? Like, people will say, oh, let's just pay people more. We'll tie the visa to the highest paying thing. Do you know how much angrier I'm going to be when they do that? Like, that's going to be their solution, is going to be, let's pay these immigrants even more. And then I'm going to be even angrier. Like, instead of paying an American $90,000 a year, you're now going to be paying, 500,000 Indians that. And I have nothing against them. I'm quarter Indian myself, the idea that we do not owe anything to our neighbors while we get rich is disgusting to me. And that is the ideology that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are bringing into the administration through Doge. I'm sorry, but I think that Doge is just it's a cover for the Chinese Communist Party.
Whoa!
What? Yes. Everything.
What?
Let me explain. I will make the case, and then you can tell me why you think this is not true. But basically, let's look at what it has accomplished so far, okay? The first accomplishment of Elon Musk has been to tank a spending bill, and the top beneficiary of that action was China, because there were limits in the first bill on investments in China that were taken out of the second bill. And I remember thinking to myself when Elon Musk was jumping up and down on stage next to Trump, it's so interesting that Elon Musk, whose entire supply chain is in China, who built a showroom for Tesla in the Xinjiang region of China, where the Uyghurs are being genocided, that he is being given the green light by Xi Jinping to try to help Donald Trump win. Because, of course, Xi Jinping would rather the Democrats win. They're much softer on China than Donald Trump is. But look how much China has already gotten for bang for its buck. And Trump's not even in office yet. They've got somebody who has never said a negative word about China. I mean, never. Now is number 2 to the throne.
But hold on. I think that there's a really interesting, and hopefully we'll assign it, very deep story to be written on Elon and China and his interest there. No question. But I completely fail to see how this isn't just a really, really simple debate, and a sincere one, between those who believe, as you do and as Steve Bannon does, in a kind of economic populist worldview, and those who believe, like Elon and Vivek and perhaps Brianna and probably me, that you can make a very potent America First argument by saying, look, in order for us to stay ahead of all of these other countries that we are kind of at, in a new Cold War with, on AI, on quantum computing, on chips, on biotech, we have to be fast, we have to be cheap, and we have to be ahead. And that we need to win. We need to beat China. And the way to do that is to get the best and the brightest around the world. It's not to say we shouldn't train people in Appalachia or anything else, but the way to do that is to get them. Like, how is it not as that's how I see it. I see it as an argument between those that have generally a free market worldview and those that don't.
Right. So two things. The first is, we are not winning if our neighbors are poor. It's not winning when our GDP goes up and 90% of that goes into Elon Musk's pocket. That is not what winning looks like. Winning is when you have a middle class that is stable, children that are upwardly mobile, who are living in safe neighborhoods, whose parents know where their retirement is coming from. You know, like that's what winning looks like. It's not just a GDP number is not winning, but also all of these supposed best and brightest are literally being trained here in the US. Like they're coming here, they're paying sticker ticket prices for our universities, and that is how they get fed into the sector. They have no, this is not like a special talent pool of unique talent. These are people who are getting an education that should be going to Americans who are not getting this education because they don't have those opportunities. They don't have access to them. They're not going to pay the sticker ticket. Like, people are getting rich off. This is not what winning looks like. As a nation, we owe something to our neighbors. We can't keep lining our pockets with the proceeds of an economy that is an upward transfer of wealth.
So let me give you a very specific example. See if I can change your mind here, though I may not be able to. Okay, so Boston Dynamics. We've all seen the videos online of the Terminator robots, right? Little dogs walking around Boston Dynamics. Like, it's great. It's right around the corner from me. I was touring it the other day. So here's a really honest question, right? Drones are such a critical part of warfare today. They have been hugely instrumental in the Russian-Ukraine war, but all of these drones are generally manufactured in China. So why does this Boston Dynamics robot, the dog robot, I think it's like $30,000, something like that. Why does it cost this much when a lot of the developmental cost for this is, it's the software for it, right? It's not like the servos and stuff are that expensive. It's because we literally don't have the factories here to build that kind of robotic technology here. And a lot of these applications, because of national security concerns, it does need to be made locally here. So here's a really concrete example of an industry that we need to be investing huge in for our national security. There are reasons to build these jobs at home. If I were in Congress, I would be going to Boston Dynamics and saying, you want some free tax money to go invest in some factories and start building servos and all this drone technology here? Great, let's do a second CHIPS Act. Let's do this. It's a national security issue. But for us to do that, we've got to bring in people from China with that kind of manufacturing expertise. Like, these companies have tried to build these things locally, and it's just we literally don't have the kinds of experts in the United States that can go, oh, this screw needs to be tweaked a little bit for us to keep the factory going on this design. We'll change it and have a new one out this afternoon. We don't have that expertise. So if you're talking about investing in America and creating a system where we can have that in 5 years, I'm 100% with you. I just think if we're closing the door to that kind of expertise, I think it's going to make it so we literally cannot compete in these fields.
Are you both totally comfortable living in a country where someone like Elon Musk fires 4,000 workers to replace them by H-1Bs?
No.
Is that so on what ground? Can we all agree that that is dastardly?
Yes.
Just to get cheaper workers to do the same thing?
Mm-hmm. No argument whatsoever.
I don't know if I would think it's dastardly. I want to ask you guys a question about the politics of this, because Batya, you're a fan of Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon's going around talking about, I guess he has 5 days left to do it, how he's going to do anything to keep Elon Musk out of the new administration, and how it's a personal goal of his to, quote, take this guy down. I don't see that happening. I don't think that Trump, who has come out strongly in favor of H-1B visas and very much on the side of Musk and Ramaswamy in this debate, is going to change course. Do you? And where is it making you sit vis-a-vis Trump in this direction of the new White House?
I think Steve Bannon is America's #1 anti-racist, and I think that he's really the most important voice if you want to understand where the Trump base is and where the working class is. So with my cards on the table, I really hope he wins. I don't know if he will. If he doesn't, I will have a very different view of Trump going into this administration.
Well, one thing that we haven't touched on that I'm obviously you guys both saw this. I'm not sure if listeners who are not perpetually online like us did. The racism on the right that came out around this issue was really, really disgusting. I mean, I don't even want to quote the kinds of things they said, but it basically amounted to why do we want these smelly Indians in our country? Get out. This is, America's for white people. Like, how alarmed should we be about those voices? Do they represent a real constituency? Do they represent the base? Like, how should we understand that, Brianna? Or Batya, either of you?
I mean, I gotta be honest. I think that it is. We saw like Indian people online. They voted for Trump that had some second thoughts about it after seeing that backlash. I'm gonna say respectfully, Steve Bannon has personally made my life much worse 10 years ago during Gamergate. So I may not be quite as big a fan of him as you are, but there's definitely this. Like both sides have our extremists. Like it's just undeniable. There is definitely a racist undercurrent that exists in the Republican Party. I don't think it's everyone. I don't think it's every Trump voter. But I think like if we're talking about the vibe shift, the biggest gift that, the Republicans could give to the Democrats that could just keep the stalemate going is to not check this and not denounce it. The same way that, frankly, Democrats have refused to denounce anti-Semitism over the last year and a half. So I think it's a real threat, and I think y'all need to deal with it.
I'll just say quickly, I saw very little of it. I did see some of it, but I saw very little of it. The number one victims of mass immigration into the United States have been Black Americans who have suffered in massive, massive ways from being replaced by foreign workers. It is verboten to talk about this. On the left, they call any attempt to stand up for Americans at the expense of non-Americans racism. And so, I refuse to accept that. Like, I will be speaking on behalf of Black Americans and working class Americans until the day I die. So I deplore any racism, but this was not about racism. This was not about race. It was uniquely about Indians because they represent a massively disproportionate number of H-1Bs. Again, as somebody who's quarter Indian, I saw very little of it, even though I was on the lookout for it. I didn't see a lot of it, although I saw some of it. I don't want to deny that it was there, but it was certainly not, present in any of the many conversations I've heard Steve Bannon have about it, that I've had about it, that I've been swimming in these waters, doing very little else, talking about very little else since Christmas. And I don't think this is a big part of the movement. I don't think it's significant in terms of that it represents why people feel so strongly about this.
You have insight, I think. And tell me, is nationalist populist the right way to explain kind of the Bannon wing of the party? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I think that's a good way.
Yeah. So you swim in those waters, you speak to those people. How enraged are they about the way Trump broke on this issue? And B, do you think that this is a fight that we're going to kind of continue to see play itself out over and over again between sort of call it MAGA 1.0, the nationalist populist that drove him to power in 2016 and perhaps representing Trump's base, unclear to me, and then sort of MAGA 2.0 with Ramaswamy and a lot of these other Silicon Valley types? Let's talk a little bit about that dynamic, because I think it's extremely interesting and a big one for people to watch.
People are infuriated. I've seen so many people reached out to me personally to say, wow, mask off moment from Elon. I used to admire him. I honestly think Vivek's political aspirations may have really hurt himself by that long tweet thread about how Americans are addicted to mediocrity and have a culture of loserdom. So I think that this is going to have a really big implication. Last time around, at some point, Ann Coulter, who was a huge proponent of Trump, one of the few people who predicted that he was going to win, she really turned on him because she felt that he sold out the controlling the border, because basically Wall Street called him and were like, where are our slaves at? You're doing too good a job there. And so he eased up some of the border restrictions. This is her narrative. And so she really turned on him. She got very angry. She supported DeSantis in the primary. So it's not like there wasn't sort of pro-business forces trying to influence Trump the first time around. He's much more focused this time around. He is much more intentional. He's sort of very laser focused on the agenda. So it'll be very interesting to see. I cannot predict who's going to win this. I think it's significant that Steve Bannon is talking about it so vigorously. Obviously that signals that Trump, I think, to me, if I had to read that, I would say it signals Trump wants this debate to happen in the public sphere so he can decide, which way to go on it. But I can't say which way it'll end up.
Okay, one thing, we were speaking earlier about the vibe shift and, Maria Shriver sort of turning against California Democrats, or at least subtly, to me is a big sign of it. Another huge sign of it from another part of California, more northern part of California, is Mark Zuckerberg and the direction that he is taking Meta. Watching the 5-minute, I don't think you can find sort of a better emblem of the vibe shift than this 5-minute video that he put out announcing that they were getting rid of their fact-checking apparatus, which had been accused of being deeply politically biased, that they were moving parts of the company to Texas, that they're unwinding DEI. I mean, he went on Joe Rogan and talked about how corporate America has become feminized. It was just this really red pill moment. Brianna, let's start with you. What did you think about this move? A sincere change of heart, opportunism? What does it augur for the next 4 years?
I think I'm going to get yelled at for saying this by my friends in the Democratic Party, but I kind of support it. And let me tell you why. Because he started that video off, Mark Zuckerberg, talking about how they made some systems in good faith, and he's found out that they've just been very abusable. And as someone whose job has literally been to run many a Facebook ad campaign or advise on them or help develop messaging for them, I've done this is literally my job, right? So I've seen firsthand how these systems are abused over and over and over again to report content that is in no way even borderline TOS, but it just upsets some people. And it really
TOS meaning violating the terms of service.
Terms of service, right. So what I've seen is functionally the way these systems have been put in place at Facebook, in my personal experience, is it's just a race to the bottom of which side can cynically attack the other and can mass report it. I've seen these groups, you get together in this group, you decide you don't like blah blah ad, and you're just going to go mass report it. This is just simply the way that both parties have had to operate. So I share his assessment that it's just so broken that for us to have an open dialogue, the community note system is going to be better. And look, every single sister I've talked to out there, it doesn't make me happy to hear some of the things they're going to be saying about transgender people now. It's very hurtful. This discussion is not going to be humanizing. It's just, I feel like we've tried this playbook of silencing the other side when they're saying some truly vile stuff, and it just has utterly failed. For everyone, women, black people, gay people, trans people, up and down the line, trying to silence speech is just making our enemies that much stronger. And I think moving forward, it's got to move back to an old school liberal idea. We've just got to have an answer for this stuff, and we've got to hit these ideas directly and have a better argument.
Do you think that this Zuckerberg pivot signals that we're post-woke? What does it mean?
Barry, it is so weird to me because I talk to Democratic operatives, and it's they're like these fighters in World War II that don't know that the war is over, right? We lost. We're moving into a new era. The vibe shift is real. And they're sitting there posting their outrage and saying they're going to leave Facebook. I can point to 20 people that I know that are doing this. It's this is not going to work. It's not going to change it. This is where America is. They want free speech. They want open discussion. They're tired of things being verboten for them to say. And it's just so enraging that Democrats don't seem to understand this yet.
The New York Times ran a headline a few days ago that read like a Babylon Bee headline or an Onion headline from the old days. It said, Meta says fact checkers were the problem. Fact checkers rule that false. I couldn't tell if it was a joke or not. Batya, anything else you want to say about that? I don't know if you saw that headline.
No, just Glenn Greenwald had such a funny point. He pointed out that in the video, Zuckerberg had a whole new wardrobe, a whole new look. He didn't look like a Silicon Valley bro anymore. He looked now like a crypto bro. He had the t-shirt and the necklace and and it was a whole different, and it's almost like he's now in his next era. And it just reads so false to me. I mean, like, I'm glad that they're doing it, but it's just evidence, like you both were saying, like of the vibe shift and nothing more. And just like that private companies, that once made their bread and butter off of being hashtag resistance wokesters are now trying to sort of like tack to the middle because they realize that that's where the money is and that's where the advantage is. Like, obviously nobody has any morals in this business, but it's, it really suggests that like people have understood that nobody is buying that earlier version anymore, and we've really fully turned a new page.
I don't know. I sort of see it as like this what Timur Kuran would call preference falsification. Like, people have been living over the past decade with private truths, saying in private, woke is a little crazy or is a lot crazy, but in public, putting up the right hashtags or the black squares or whatever you're supposed to do. And I think what's happened since November 5th, and maybe actually since the attempted assassination against Trump on July 13th, is just the shattering of that, like, illusion. I think that people who sincerely felt like, and maybe Mark Zuckerberg is one of these people, you could look to, for earlier evidence of the vibe shift, you could look to his desire to raise and butcher his own animals or getting into jujitsu. There were signs, is all I'm saying. Is like, now the water's warm, right? Mm-hmm. Now that it's sort of like politically and culturally and socially and reputationally acceptable, more people are coming out and just being like, hey, that was a little crazy. And honestly, that's how I see it.
Barry, I wanted to ask you about this because I feel some type of way to see all the people who called me racist for pointing out that, like, the real divide in America is class, it's not race. All these people called me racist for saying this, like, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. And now they're all saying it with, like, without a shred of, like, self-reflection, like, oh, maybe, like, all these people's lives we tried to destroy, like, they actually were saying this, right? Do you feel, like, resentful about that, or you just feel grateful that it's over?
I think I'm having whiplash. Like, what's the line in Ferris Bueller? Like, life comes at you fast. Like, every time I turn around, another person that I regarded as sort of like a zombie politically is now like come to life. Peter Thiel actually had quite an interesting piece in the Financial Times over the weekend, calling for almost like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, saying basically, which speaks to your point. Like, he's
Hilarious.
Basically saying it's really nice. I'm going to paraphrase this, but he basically says that in order for us to truly move on, it's not enough for people to just like have a change of heart. We basically need an accountability. We need a Twitter files for everything that's happened, from the cover up of the lab leak to, and he named a bunch of other things. And I felt like it's really, really provocative and like everything Peter says, and very much worth a read. We have 3 minutes left before Batya needs to go and yap on television. So last thing. Confirmation hearings start this week. We're recording this in the afternoon of Monday, January 13th. Tomorrow, Senate hearings are going to begin for several of Trump's cabinet picks. They don't need Democrats to pass these appointments, but there might be some Republican holdouts for the more controversial picks, like, let's say, Pete Hegseth for defense, or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for HHS, or maybe Kash Patel for FBI. What are your predictions for these guys specifically? Hegseth, Kennedy, Patel. Are they going to make their way through, or is Susan Collins going to stop them from getting to their appointments? What do you think? Is Hegseth going to be defense secretary? Is RFK Jr. going to run HHS? And is Kash Patel going to run FBI? Let's have answers from both of you. Pete Hegseth, yay or nay, Brianna? Going to make it through?
I don't think so, no.
Batya?
Instead of doing a prediction, which I'm always wrong about those, so I'll just give you a little insight into something that happened over the weekend, which is I ran an op-ed at Newsweek by Greg Kelly, who's a Newsmax host, which if I tell you that, you would assume that this would be very pro Pete Hegseth, but actually what he argues is that Pete Hegseth has already shown himself susceptible to being blackmailed because he was blackmailed by this woman who accused him of sexual harassment and assault, etc. And the fact that came in, I think that there are people looking for cover to demur on Pete Hegseth, which I was surprised by. So there's a little more pushback than I was expecting on that one. And as far as the other two, the person to watch, it's John Fetterman. I mean, talk about the MVP. This guy has come out and just had, a spine of steel. He's meeting Trump, he's meeting all these people and saying, he said about the Lake and Riley Act, if we can't get 7 Democratic senators to vote for this thing. We deserve to lose. Like, just calling all of the truth bombs out there. And I think he had a really nice meeting with RFK Jr. actually and Pete Hegseth. So, there might be more Democratic support than we're expecting.
This is what our party needs to do desperately. We've got to work with the Republicans where it makes sense, find common ground. I'm old enough to remember when this is how it used to work, instead of digging your heels in, and then Bush 2.0 happened. But this is my message to you, Batya. It's like, as a Democratic operative, I almost hope this chaos happens. But I think the Republicans would be very smart to put the kibosh on Elon's involvement, like the way he tilted the debt ceiling crisis a few weeks ago, tried to put himself in the middle of the government. Like, that's going to be really bad news for the Republicans if that stands. And I think if you can put the kibosh on this and get some competent people in there, I think you're going to have a lot of Democrats that are going to go the Fetterman way and are willing to get some stuff done for the American people. I think if it's just the crazy, what's going to happen is you're going to give us the ammo we need to dig our heels in and go complain on Resistance Twitter. It's just going to be like 2016 all over again. So we'll see.
Okay, well, Batya Ungar-Sargon, Brianna Wu, next time we talk, Trump will be the president of the United States. So eager to see what happens this week in the Senate, what happens on Inauguration Day. And I'll talk to you guys after January 20th. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Barry.
Looking forward to it.